Hey guys, Nick from Evolve Skateboards here. Today we're going to be showing you how to remove and replace the motor controller in your GT series board. Today we're doing it on a carbon series to show you. First of all, we're going to need to remove the screws to the top of the deck so we can remove the battery case and gain access to the wiring and the connectors inside the board. For this, the tools you're going to need are these two Allen keys out of your Evolve toolkit. If you have a carbon board, you're going to want the 2.5mm Allen key, which is this little one here. That'll undo the battery case screws for the carbon. If you have a bamboo board, you're going to want this Allen key, which has a 1/8 Allen key bit on the end of it. Alternatively, you can use a drill with a 1/8 bit if you have a bamboo, or a drill with a 2.5mm Allen key bit if you have the carbon. So you'll need the small Allen key from your toolkit. This will undo the screws on the top of the deck for you. For this exercise, we're going to be using the drill just to speed things up a little bit. Okay. Remove the battery case cover, place underneath out of the way. Now we have access to the motor controller and the motor controller wires, the motor wires and the battery wires. So the first thing we need to do is isolate the battery power from the motor controller to make sure there's no residual power in the system. To do that, we need to disconnect this red connector here. Once that's disconnected, we can then undo it from the retainers and begin with disconnecting the other connectors. First, we have to remove the uart cable. This is a battery communication cable. It's very important that we don't damage these wires or the pins. Like all the other connectors to the motor controller, it does have a little clip underneath the connector, which we need to depress before we try and remove it. To do that, you can use your little Allen key from your toolkit to do this. Simply slide underneath, angle it up to the clip, and you can remove the connector like so. There's that clip on top. The same thing can be done with the battery switch connector on the same side of the motor controller. On the other side, we then have our motor controller connectors once again. The main power connectors are these yellow ones. They simply pull apart with no clips. The three connectors we have here are the on-off switch and the Hall 1 and Hall 2 connectors for the motors. Once again, we can use our Allen key to depress the clip underneath the connectors, being very careful that it is depressed before we try and remove it. Like such. Do the same again for the Hall connectors. Okay. We've now disconnected all the connectors out of the motor controller. Also, for further safety reasons, we will also disconnect the charging port. Now, as you can see, the motor controller is completely isolated from all other components. From here, we now turn the board up on its side, and we can see the 4 Allen key screws through the heatsink securing the motor controller to the deck. These are for this little Allen key here. Fits into these screws. And we turn anti-clockwise to remove. These screws may be tight. If they feel like they are too tight for the Allen keys, well, you may need to heat them. As you can see, they do have a little bit of Loctite on the screws. You might need to heat them lightly with a hairdryer just to break up that Loctite a little bit and make them a little bit easier to remove. The motor controller heatsink is now free, and this brings out the complete motor controller. So that is your complete motor controller then removed from the board. Okay, now that we've removed our old motor controller, we can now reinstall a new motor controller. Simply follow the steps in reverse to what we've just done to remove it, being very careful as we're installing it not to pinch these wires between the heatsink and the deck housing. Reinstall these 4 heatsink screws in the corners. Just go around and make sure that they're all nice and firm. Careful not to over tighten them, or you can risk damaging the screw head and rounding the hex bit. Now we can flip the board back over onto its wheels, and we have access to the wiring again. From here, we can start reconnecting all the wires we have previously disconnected in a reverse order. So we'll start with the charging port connector, plug that back in, and we can work anti-clockwise back around. We'll start with the motor power connector, hall connector, the on-off switch, the second motor power connector, now we have the battery switch over here, and the UART cable. Finally, we can reconnect the main power connector. It is best to feed this one underneath the battery switch and the UART cables, keep it out of the way, and then we can just reconnect it quite simply like that. Ensure the wires go back into their securing anchor points in the deck. And that's a new motor controller installed. Turn the board on with the switch underneath, turn the remote on, lift the wheels off the ground, give the trigger a pull, and make sure both wheels are operating. This is fine.